On the outskirts of Willow Creek, nestled between rolling hills and endless fields of golden hay, stood Sarah Thompson's family farm. It wasn't just any ordinary farm. It was a piece of history, passed down through generations. The barn, with its weathered wooden beams and rustic charm, had become something of a local treasure. Over time, Sarah started renting it out for special occasions, birthday parties, small concerts, and even the occasional photo shoot. She loved seeing people enjoy the space that held so many memories for her. But there was one rule Sarah followed religiously. She always vetted the renters carefully. After all, this was her home, her sanctuary. She didn't want anyone trashing the place or causing trouble. So when an email popped into her inbox from Karen Whitmore, Sarah hesitated before opening it. Karen's name was familiar enough. She was the head of the Neighborhood Homeowners Association, HOA, a woman known for being strict, opinionated, and, well, difficult. The subject line read, "Urgent inquiry about your barn." Curious but cautious, Sarah clicked on the email. Inside, Karen explained that she wanted to host her daughter's wedding at the barn. She described it as a rustic-themed event, complete with fairy lights, floral arrangements, and everything picture-perfect. There was no mention of meeting in person to discuss details, no polite inquiry about availability, just a demand wrapped in flowery language. And then came the kicker. "Please confirm immediately. This is a once-in-a-lifetime occasion." Sarah sighed. She'd heard stories about Karen, how she micromanaged every aspect of the HOA meetings, how she sent strongly worded letters to neighbors over minor infractions like leaving trash cans out overnight. But still, a wedding? That sounded harmless. Enough. Plus, Karen offered a hefty deposit right away, which made the decision easier. Money was tight since Sarah had been putting funds aside for some much-needed repairs around the farm. After a brief phone call where Karen reiterated how important this day was, Sarah agreed to rent the barn. She figured it wouldn't hurt. What could possibly go wrong? What Sarah didn't know, at least not yet, was that another agreement had already been made. Months earlier, she'd rented the barn to a local fitness group organizing a charity mud run. They were using the property as part of their race course, planning to set up tents near the barn for changing areas and post-race celebrations. The event promised to bring dozens of energetic participants eager to raise money for a good cause. Sarah had forgotten about the overlap because the dates seemed so far off. Who would have thought two completely different groups would book the same weekend? As the weeks went by, Sarah stayed busy tending to her crops and animals, occasionally thinking about the upcoming events. She imagined the barn decorated beautifully for the wedding, with soft lighting and elegant decorations. At the same time, she pictured muddy runners laughing and cheering after completing the grueling race. Both scenarios brought a smile to her face, though she never imagined they might collide. Karen, meanwhile, dove headfirst into wedding planning. She scoured Pinterest boards, hired caterers, and sent detailed emails to Sarah outlining exactly how she expected the barn to look. Every detail mattered to her, from the placement of chairs to the color of the tablecloths. Her tone grew increasingly demanding as the date approached, culminating in a stern warning. "If anything goes wrong, I'll hold you personally responsible." Sarah tried to reassure her, promising to make sure everything was perfect. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's high expectations might lead to trouble. Little did she know the real problem wouldn't come from Karen's perfectionism alone. Unbeknownst to Sarah, the fitness group was equally excited about their event. They'd spent months training for the mud run, promoting it online, and gathering sponsors. For them, the barn represented a cozy finish line, a place to celebrate their hard work and camaraderie. None of them suspected that a fancy wedding might crash their party. And so, as the fateful day drew closer, the stage was set for a collision of worlds. On one side, there was Karen, determined to create a flawless memory for her daughter. The other? A group of enthusiastic athletes ready to embrace the messiness of life. Neither side knew what awaited them, but Sarah, caught in the middle, began to feel the weight of her oversight pressing down on her shoulders. Would the wedding go smoothly? Or would the mud run turn everything upside down? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Sarah's quiet little farm was about to become the center of attention in ways no one could have predicted. The day of the event finally arrived, and Sarah woke up early, her stomach twisting with a mix of excitement and anxiety. She had spent the past few days preparing the barn for Karen's wedding, making sure it looked as pristine and charming as possible. Fairy lights hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the wooden beams. Fresh flowers sat in vases on every surface, their sweet scent filling the air. Sarah even swept the dirt floor until it was as smooth as she could make it, though she knew it would never quite match Karen's vision of perfection. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Sarah received a call from Karen. It wasn't unexpected. Karen had been calling or texting nearly every hour for the past week. But this time, her tone was sharper than usual. "Sarah," Karen began, her voice clipped. "I need you to move the chairs closer together. They're too spread out and it looks sloppy. Also, can you add more flowers? The ones you have now are underwhelming." Sarah bit her lip, trying to stay calm. "Karen, I've already arranged everything based on what you asked for last week. Moving things around now will take time and the guests will be here soon." "Well, then you'd better get started," Karen snapped. "This is my daughter's special day, Sarah. If anything goes wrong, heads will roll. Do I make myself clear?" Sarah sighed but nodded, even though Karen couldn't see her. "I'll do my best," she said before hanging up. She didn't have time to dwell on Karen's demands because, at that very moment, a group of people appeared at the edge of the property. They weren't dressed in suits or elegant dresses like wedding guests. They were covered in mud, sweat glistening on their faces, and wearing bright athletic gear. It was the fitness group arriving early to set up for their mud run. Sarah groaned inwardly. Of course they'd show up today. She had completely forgotten about them in the chaos of planning for the wedding. As the runners approached the barn, one of them, a tall man with a clipboard and an easy smile, waved at her. "Hey there, you must be Sarah. We're here for the race. Everything still good for using the barn?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how to explain the situation without causing a scene. Yes, but there's been a bit of a mix-up. Another group booked the barn for today, so we might need to adjust some plans." The man frowned, glancing at his teammates. "A mix-up? What does that mean exactly?" Before Sarah could answer, Karen's voice rang out behind her. She had arrived earlier than expected, her arms loaded with boxes of decorations. "Who are these people?" she demanded, eyeing the muddy runners with obvious disdain. "This is a private event. You need to leave immediately." The runners exchanged confused glances. One of them, a woman with streaks of mud across her cheeks, stepped forward. "Private event? We've rented this barn for our mud run. We've been planning this for months." Karen's face turned red. "That's impossible. I rented this barn for my daughter's wedding. Surely you can see that your, whatever this is, doesn't belong here." Sarah stepped between them, holding up her hands. Okay, let's all just calm down. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. I didn't realize both groups had booked the same day." "A misunderstanding?" Karen shrieked. "This is unacceptable. Sarah, you assured me this wouldn't happen. How could you let this mess interfere with my daughter's big day?" The runners bristled at her words. The man with the clipboard crossed his arms. "Listen, lady, we're not leaving. We've worked hard for this event, and we're not going to let anyone ruin it for us. Maybe you should find somewhere else to hold your fancy party." Karen gasped, clutching her chest dramatically. "How dare you speak to me like that? This is my daughter's wedding, not some ridiculous mudslinging contest." The tension escalated quickly. Voices grew louder, accusations flew back and forth, and Sarah found herself caught in the middle, desperately trying to mediate. "Please," she pleaded, "we can figure this out. Let's try to work together." But no one was listening. Just as tempers reached their peak, disaster struck, or rather stumbled. A runner who had been attempting to wipe mud off his shoes slipped on the damp ground near the entrance of the barn. He slid backward, crashing into Karen's carefully laid aisle runner. Mud smeared across the pristine white fabric, leaving long, dark streaks. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Karen erupted. "That's it, that's absolutely it. Look what you've done. This is ruined, ruined." She pointed an accusatory finger at the runner, her face flushed with anger. "You people are animals. You've sabotaged my daughter's wedding?" The runner threw up his hands defensively. "It was an accident. And besides, maybe if you hadn't barged in here acting like you owned the place, none of this would have happened." Sarah felt her heart sink. This was spiraling out of control faster than she could keep up. She tried again to intervene, her voice trembling. "Everyone, please stop. We need to find a solution. Fighting isn't going to help anyone." But Karen wasn't done. She marched up to Sarah, jabbing a finger into her chest. "If you don't fix this right now, I'm reporting you to the HOA. Mark my words, Sarah. You'll regret this." The threat hung heavy in the air, but before Sarah could respond, the first drops of rain began to fall. At first, it was just a light drizzle, but within minutes, the skies opened up, drenching everyone in sight. Bridesmaids squealed as their dresses got soaked, groomsmen slipped and slid in their dress shoes, and Karen's perfectly styled hair quickly unraveled into a frizzy mess. The runners, however, seemed unfazed. In fact, they laughed, cheering as the rain turned the ground into slick mud pits. "Looks like the weather's on our side," one of them shouted, sliding gleefully through the muck. Karen stared in horror as her meticulously planned wedding dissolved into chaos. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time she looked less like the domineering HOA queen and more like a defeated mother watching her dream crumble. Sarah watched her silently, feeling a strange mix of pity and frustration. Despite the growing storm, neither side backed down. The runners refused to leave, arguing that they had every right to use the barn. Karen, meanwhile, insisted that her wedding take priority. With lightning flashing in the distance and thunder rumbling overhead, it became clear that this standoff wasn't going to resolve itself anytime soon. Sarah glanced at the barn, now filled with a bizarre mix of muddy athletes and soggy wedding guests. Somehow she needed to find a way to bring these two worlds together, or risk losing her farm's reputation forever. But as the rain poured down and tensions simmered, she wondered if peace was even possible. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the ground around the barn into a slippery, muddy mess. Inside, the situation was just as chaotic. Karen paced back and forth, her once pristine white blouse now speckled with mud and rainwater. Her hair clung to her face in damp strands, and her makeup had started to streak down her cheeks. She looked like a woman on the verge of breaking. Meanwhile, the runners had taken full advantage of the weather. They laughed and cheered as they slid through the mud, tossing handfuls of it at each other in playful camaraderie. For them, this was part of the fun, exactly what they'd signed up for when they registered for the mud run. But for Karen, it was a nightmare come true. Every time she glanced outside, she saw her carefully planned wedding falling apart before her eyes. Sarah stood near the entrance of the barn, torn between the two groups. On one side, Karen's fury simmered dangerously close to boiling over. On the other, the runners' carefree energy clashed wildly with the formality of the wedding. Sarah knew she needed to do something, anything, to bring some semblance of order to the chaos. But how? Just as she was about to step forward and try talking to both sides again, another problem arose. The power went out. A loud pop echoed from somewhere nearby, followed by darkness swallowing the barn. The fairy lights flickered and died, plunging everyone into shadow. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people stumbled around, trying to adjust to the sudden lack of light. For a moment, panic set in. Wedding guests fumbled with their phones, using flashlights to illuminate their surroundings. Runners shouted jokes about going off the grid, though their laughter sounded more nervous than amused. Karen let out a strangled cry, clutching her head in her hands. "This is a disaster," she wailed. "A complete and utter disaster." In the dim glow of phone screens and emergency lanterns, Sarah spotted an opportunity. With no electricity and no clear way to continue either event as planned, both groups were forced to pause and regroup. Taking a deep breath, she raised her voice above the murmurs. "Everyone, please listen. I know this isn't what any of us expected, but we're all stuck here together. Fighting won't solve anything. Let's figure out how to make the best of this." Her words hung in the air for a moment, met with silence. Then, surprisingly, Mike, the leader of the fitness group, spoke up. "She's right," he said, stepping forward. His tone was calm but firm. "We didn't plan for this, but that doesn't mean we can't adapt. Why don't we work together to salvage both events?" Karen whirled on him, her eyes flashing. "Work together? With you? You've already ruined everything." Mike held up his hands defensively. "Hey, nobody meant for this to happen. Accidents happen, and so does bad weather. But if we keep pointing fingers, we'll end up ruining the whole day for everyone. Wouldn't it be better to find a way to make this work?" To Sarah's astonishment, Karen hesitated. For the first time since the conflict began, she seemed to soften slightly. Her shoulders sagged, and her voice cracked as she spoke. I wanted this to be perfect for my daughter. I worked so hard to make sure every detail was exactly right. And now..." She trailed off, shaking her head. Mike nodded sympathetically. "I get it. Believe me, I do. We put a lot of effort into this race, too. It's not just about running through mud, it's about raising money for charity and bringing people together. But sometimes, things don't go according to plan. That doesn't mean we can't still create something special." His words seemed to strike a chord with Karen. Slowly, she sank onto a wooden bench near the wall, covering her face with her hands. Sarah approached cautiously, sitting beside her. "Karen," she said gently, "I'm really sorry about all this. It's my fault for double booking the barn. But maybe there's a way we can turn this into something memorable for both your daughter and the runners." Karen looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. How? How can we possibly fix this?" Sarah glanced at Mike, who gave her an encouraging nod. Together, they outlined a plan. The runners agreed to relocate their post-race celebration to a nearby field, leaving the barn free for the wedding ceremony. In exchange, Karen promised to apologize for her earlier behavior and allow the runners to use some of their leftover supplies, glow sticks, portable lanterns, and even waterproof tarps to help decorate the space. As the groups began working together, something remarkable happened. The initial tension melted away, replaced by a sense of shared purpose. Runners pitched in to help rearrange chairs and tables, while wedding guests joined in the effort, laughing as they slipped and slid in the mud. Someone found a speaker system, powered by car batteries, and soon music filled the air, a mix of upbeat tracks from the runners' playlist and romantic ballads chosen by Karen. By the time the bride arrived, escorted by her father under a makeshift umbrella made from a tarp, the scene inside the barn was unrecognizable. Glow sticks dangled from the rafters, casting a soft, ethereal light over the space. Lanterns lined the aisles, their warm glow reflecting off the wet wood. Even the muddy streaks on the aisle runner had been embraced as part of the rustic theme. Karen watched silently as her daughter walked down the aisle, her expression a mixture of awe and gratitude. For the first time that day, she smiled. Not the tight-lipped, forced smile she'd worn earlier, but a genuine one. As the ceremony unfolded, the atmosphere shifted from chaos to celebration. Guests mingled with runners, sharing stories and laughter. One bridesmaid even joined in a spontaneous dance-off with a runner, much to everyone's delight. Outside, the storm began to ease. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and faint streaks of sunlight broke through the clouds. By the time the reception started, the worst of the weather had passed. Tables were set up under the stars, lit by strings of glowing lights salvaged from both events. Food trucks hired by the runners served hearty meals alongside the catered dishes Karen had arranged. It was a bizarre, yet beautiful fusion of two very different worlds. As the night wore on, the unlikely alliance grew stronger. Speeches were given, toasts were made, and memories were created. The bride and groom cut their cake with a knife borrowed from the runner's supply kit, while the fitness group presented them with a custom t-shirt emblazoned with "Mud-Free Newlyweds" in bold letters. Even Karen managed to crack a smile, raising a glass to toast the couple, and indirectly to the unexpected camaraderie that had saved the day. For Sarah, watching it all unfold was nothing short of magical. What had started as a disaster had transformed into something extraordinary. As she stood at the edge of the gathering, sipping a cup of hot cocoa provided by one of the runners, she realized that sometimes the best moments in life aren't planned, they're improvised. And sometimes the most unlikely combinations can lead to the most unforgettable experiences. But as the evening drew to a close and the last guests prepared to leave, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, would Karen ever forgive her for the mix-up? And would the farm's reputation survive the chaos of this unforgettable day? Only time would tell. As the night wore on, the unlikely alliance between the wedding party and the mud runners continued to grow stronger. The initial tension that had threatened to tear the day apart was now replaced by a sense of camaraderie that no one could have predicted. People who had started the day as strangers or even adversaries were now laughing together, sharing stories, and finding common ground in the chaos. Karen, still seated at one of the long tables decorated with mismatched lanterns and glow sticks, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. She couldn't believe how far things had come from just a few hours ago, when she'd been ready to call off the entire wedding. Her daughter, Emily, sat beside her, glowing with happiness despite the unconventional turn of events. Karen reached out and squeezed her hand, her heart swelling with emotion. This wasn't the perfect, Pinterest-worthy wedding she'd envisioned, but it was turning into something far more meaningful. The fitness group, led by Mike, had fully embraced their role in salvaging the day. They didn't hesitate to lend a hand wherever needed, whether it was helping set up chairs, stringing up additional lights, or even entertaining the younger wedding guests with impromptu games. One runner, a wiry man named Jake, had taken it upon himself to teach the flower girl how to do cartwheels in the muddy grass, much to everyone's amusement. The little girl giggled uncontrollably, her white dress now streaked with dirt, but she didn't seem to care in the slightest. Even the caterers, initially flustered by the unexpected changes, got into the spirit of things. They teamed up with the food trucks hired by the runners to create an eclectic menu that somehow worked perfectly. Guests nibbled on gourmet hors d'oeuvres alongside hearty barbecue sandwiches, washing it all down with craft beers and homemade lemonade. It was a culinary mashup that reflected the unique blend of elegance and ruggedness that had come to define the evening. As the festivities carried on, Sarah found herself at the center of it all, playing hostess to this bizarre yet beautiful gathering. She moved between groups, making sure everyone was comfortable and ensuring that the fragile peace held. To her relief, the animosity between Karen and the runners seemed to have dissipated entirely. In fact, Karen appeared to be softening, not just toward the runners, but toward herself. Gone was the rigid perfectionist who had demanded absolute control over every detail. In her place was a woman who seemed genuinely touched by the kindness and resilience of those around her. At one point, Mike approached Karen holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. "Truce?" he asked, offering her one of the mugs with a sheepish grin. Karen hesitated for a moment, then accepted the drink with a small smile. "Thank you," she said softly. I'm sorry for the way I acted earlier. I was so focused on making everything perfect that I forgot what really matters." Mike nodded. "No hard feelings. Honestly, this might be the most memorable event any of us will ever attend. And hey, if nothing else, we gave your daughter a story she'll never forget." Karen chuckled, shaking her head. "That's true. Who else can say their wedding included a mud run?" The laughter lingered as the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Karen learned that many of the runners were raising money for a local children's hospital, and she found herself genuinely impressed by their dedication. In turn, the runners discovered that Karen's obsession with perfection stemmed from her desire to give her daughter the fairy tale wedding she'd always dreamed of. By the end of the night, they were swapping phone numbers and promising to stay in touch, a testament to the unexpected bonds formed during moments of adversity. Meanwhile, Sarah took a quiet moment to step outside and breathe in the cool night air. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a sky filled with stars. The barn, once the epicenter of chaos, now glowed warmly in the distance, its makeshift decorations casting a soft light over the muddy field. She smiled to herself, marveling at how everything had turned out. What had started as a disaster had become something extraordinary, a celebration of community, adaptability, and human connection. Back inside, the reception was reaching its peak. The DJ, originally hired for the wedding, had teamed up with the runner's portable speaker system to create a playlist that appealed to everyone. Couples swayed to slow songs, while others danced wildly to upbeat tracks. At one point, Karen even joined in, laughing as she attempted a line dance with some of the runners. Her movements were awkward and unpolished, but her joy was undeniable. Emily, the bride, stood beside her new husband, watching the scene with tears in her eyes. "Mom," she said, pulling Karen aside, "this is the best wedding I could have imagined. It's not what we planned, but it's exactly what I wanted." Karen hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by emotion. "I love you, sweetheart. I'm so glad you're happy." As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the energy began to wind down. Runners packed up their gear, thanking Sarah profusely for letting them share the space. Wedding guests gathered their belongings, bidding farewell to the newlyweds and expressing their amazement at how the day had unfolded. Even Karen lingered, shaking hands with Mike and his team, promising to support their charity efforts in the future. When the last car pulled away and the barn fell silent, Sarah finally allowed herself to relax. She walked through the empty space, taking in the remnants of the evening. Glow sticks lay scattered across the floor, their faint light flickering weakly. Muddy footprints covered the walls and floors, evidence of the wild celebration that had taken place. Yet instead of feeling stressed or frustrated, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Despite the challenges, she had managed to bring two very different groups together, and in doing so, she had created something truly special. But as she locked up the barn and headed back to her house, Sarah knew there would be lessons to learn from this experience. Double booking the barn had been a mistake, one she wouldn't repeat. Still, she couldn't help but wonder, had this chaotic day revealed something important about human nature? About the power of compromise and the beauty of embracing imperfection? Only time would tell. For now, though, Sarah was content to let the memory of this unforgettable evening linger, a reminder that sometimes the best moments in life are the ones you never see coming. The morning after the wedding mud run hybrid event dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the stormy chaos of the previous day. Sarah woke up early, her body sore from the long hours spent running around the farm, but her mind buzzing with thoughts of what had transpired. She brewed a strong cup of coffee and stepped outside, taking in the sight of her property. The barn still stood proudly, though it bore the marks of the night before, muddy handprints on its walls, trampled grass surrounding it, and a few stray glow sticks scattered across the ground. As she sipped her coffee, Sarah reflected on the whirlwind of emotions she'd experienced over the past 24 hours. What had started as a logistical nightmare had somehow transformed into something extraordinary. The unlikely alliance between Karen's wedding party and the Mudrunners had not only saved the day but also created memories that would last a lifetime for everyone involved. By mid-morning, Sarah began the cleanup process. Volunteers from both groups showed up unexpectedly, eager to help restore the barn to its original state. Runners arrived with buckets and scrub brushes, while wedding guests brought trash bags and cleaning supplies. Even Karen made an appearance, rolling up, her sleeves and pitching in without complaint. It was a far cry from the demanding woman who had stormed onto the property the day before. As they worked side by side, laughter filled the air. Stories from the night before were retold, each one eliciting fresh rounds of chuckles. One runner recounted how he'd slipped during the reception and landed in a puddle of mud, only to be helped up by the groom himself. Another guest described the moment when the flower girl attempted a cartwheel and ended up face first in the dirt, giggling uncontrollably. These anecdotes served as reminders of how joy could emerge from even the most chaotic situations. Karen approached Sarah during a break in the cleanup, her demeanor noticeably softer than it had been the day before. "Sarah," she began, her voice tinged with sincerity, "I owe you an apology. I was difficult yesterday. I let my desire for perfection blind me to what really mattered." Sarah smiled warmly. "Apology accepted, Karen, and honestly, I should have been more careful about double booking the barn. This whole mess was partly my fault, too. Karen shook her head. No, it wasn't just you. If I hadn't been so rigid, maybe we could have avoided some of the tension. But look at what happened in the end. It turned out beautifully, didn't it? It did, Sarah agreed. And I think we all learned something valuable. Sometimes letting go of control can lead to moments you never expected. Karen nodded thoughtfully. You're right. I've spent so much time worrying about rules and appearances through the HOA. But last night reminded me that life isn't about perfection. It's about connection. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics as they continued working together. By late afternoon, the barn looked almost as good as new, or at least as close as it could get after such an eventful evening. The muddy streaks on the aisle runner had been scrubbed away, the glow sticks gathered into a pile, and the lanterns carefully packed up for future use. Though the scars of the storm remained in the form of flattened grass and soggy patches of earth, the farm carried an aura of resilience. That evening, Sarah hosted a small gathering at her house to thank everyone who had helped with the cleanup. Pizza boxes and soda cans littered the kitchen table, and the living room buzzed with lively chatter. Mike raised a toast to Sarah, praising her for keeping her cool under pressure and bringing two very different groups together. Here's to Sarah, he said, lifting his glass, the unsung hero of this crazy adventure. Everyone cheered, and Sarah blushed, feeling both humbled and grateful. As the night wore on, talk turned to the possibility of hosting similar events in the future. One runner joked about combining weddings with obstacle courses, while another suggested turning the barn into a permanent venue for mud and champagne celebrations. To Sarah's surprise, Karen didn't object. Instead, she laughed along, admitting that the idea had its charm. When the guests finally left, Sarah sat alone in her quiet living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. She realized that the experience had taught her, and everyone else involved, a powerful lesson. Perfection is overrated. Life is messy, unpredictable, and often chaotic. But it's also full of opportunities to adapt, connect, and find beauty in imperfection. In the days that followed, word of the unusual event spread throughout Willow Creek. Neighbors stopped by to ask Sarah about the mud wedding, their curiosity piqued by the strange yet heartwarming story. Some came to offer congratulations, while others expressed interest in renting the barn themselves. Sarah politely declined requests for mud and wedding hybrids, explaining that she preferred to keep things simple moving forward. Still, she couldn't deny the strange allure of the idea. It had certainly left an impression on everyone involved. For Karen, the aftermath of the wedding brought a newfound sense of perspective. She became less rigid in her role as HOA president, focusing more on fostering community spirit than enforcing strict rules. Her relationship with Sarah improved significantly, evolving into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and understanding. As for the fitness group, they hailed the event as their most successful charity race yet. Inspired by the camaraderie they'd experienced, they decided to make the mud run an annual tradition with Sarah's farm as its permanent home base. Each year they promised to donate a portion of the proceeds to local causes, ensuring that the memory of that fateful night lived on in meaningful ways. Looking back, Sarah knew the weekend had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had always valued order and routine, but now she understood the importance of flexibility and openness to new experiences. The barn, once simply a structure on her property, had become a symbol of resilience and unity, a place where people from different walks of life could come together and create something truly special. And so, life on the farm returned to its usual rhythm, though with a renewed sense of purpose. Sarah tended to her crops, cared for her animals, and occasionally glanced at the barn, smiling at the memories it held. She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she and her little corner of Willow Creek would face them with courage, creativity, and a willingness to embrace the unexpected. Because sometimes the best stories are the ones you never planned for.